Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Richard Camino, and I have to fill in today the shoes of Nick, which are going to be very big shoes to fill today. But we have a wonderful panel. Kevin Koch is with here, Laura Martin, and we also have one more, which I think I missed, but he will present himself when it's time. So we are discussing the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, and one of the things that I think is important is that to recap many of the things that we have said before is that many people really honestly don't see themselves as racist. They think that they treat everybody, well. They think that, everybody, needs an opportunity. So, why even read a book about racism? Because I'm not a racist. I'm not need to be taught on that. I think what the book brings to the table is that racism is not only about my belief, if I think everybody should, be treated, like a human being. It's understanding that everybody is born in different circumstances, and that those circumstances have a lot to do with their possibility of being successful and or being uh, unsuccessful. So I would like today. I'm just gonna because I think it's very much linked with chapter two, and I think from there we can have a discussion and just finish chapter two to move on. Hopefully next week to chapter three. But it's about what causes our thought process to be uh, racist. So I'm going to use a little bit of history. So I'm gonna share my screen over here. Let's see here, share screen, application. I'm going to see. Hmm. Okay, this is not what I want to share. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me share again. And I have shared like a PowerPoint, so I want to be sure that I go to share with all of you. Let's see if I can get it. So, um, what I'm going to do is I am really having trouble with pushing this. Let me see now if I can do it. And if not, I will go ahead and Windows.
It's okay. While you're pulling up your PowerPoint, um, I just wanted to quickly remark on what you were saying that folks have this automatic response when you are talking about them being racist or something being racist. And it's not this book, but it's a very good book for allies and other white folks called White Fragility. And that book helps folks just sort of piece through racism, their emotional response to being called racist, ways to think through that and kind of unpack some of that and unpack your own stuff in order to get past that immediate fragile response that, listen, white folk, we are well known for, especially white ladies. And the way that I kind of like to break it down is racist, capital R, versus racist, little r. And, we think of something being racist or someone being racist as like these really egregious crimes, or somebody out in the hood in the middle of umpteen southern states. But it's so much more than that. And it is systemic while also being individual. And so when we can unpack some of that, I think people come to the conversation from a different place, potentially, hopefully.
So working from where you are, I just couldn't get on my PowerPoint, but I have it here and I'm just going to read a little bit about it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think we need to turn off our mic when the other one is speaking. So because there we go. Thank you. So one of the things is why do we believe what we believe? Well, there is this Italian guy from the beginning of the 20th century called Antonio Gramsci. And one of the things that he said, it was that those in power created ideologies. And that word might sound like a strange word. So let's say created the way that people should think. So the beliefs, the assumptions, the values, what is important, how we should believe, how we should live our lives. This is part of this idea of what is an ideology. So I'm going to give you an example of what that ideology might look like. So when anthropologists went from let's say from Europe or from the USA, went to Latin America, and I am a Latin American. I'm from Puerto Rico. So or went to Africa, or went to even the East, China. They look at those cultures and they found, and they use the word, these are primitive cultures. So what does the word primitive mean? Well, the word primitive meant that they were backwards, that they were like we were maybe 300 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So that means that those cultures are inferior, and those cultures, at the end, need to adapt to what we have. So this type of belief that we are the culture, that the ideology forms, we find it even in our old, not the new ones are a little bit better on that, but the old history book, that they use the word, if they go to, let's say that we go to the Amazon and we are confronted with a tribe, a group of people. And this group of people, they, let's say that they don't have internet, they don't have any of the, the technology that we have. Well, we might see them and we think they are, maybe if they're basically on agriculture, or they just are, what we sometimes call, they're hunters, or, whatever their means of doing it. In the old days, they will see this and, oh, these are primitive persons. Well, the problem is, by saying primitive, is that they are not only different from me, but I am not primitive. They are primitive. I am better. They are not as better. Let me help them to become one of me. So if you read chapter 2, what is saying in chapter 2 is that this concept of assimilation, that they need to become what I am becoming, to be one of us. What that does is that destroys the culture that is there, so they can become the culture, the dominant culture. So I am going to give you an example, a last example of this, to make sense of it. I tend to ask. I was giving a Bible class, and I was one of the things that I was saying in that Bible class is that when we, when you read, the Apocalypse of John, or or when you read the letters of John, well, I don't know Greek, but those who know Greek clearly have told me that, you know, clearly two different persons wrote this. They're totally different styles of writing, but you only can know it if you read that language. Because when it's translated, the translation homogenizes the way that I read it. So, what is homogenization? What do I mean by that? Well, the best example that I can give you, and this applies also for culture when we try to assimilate, is have anyone here drank or drinks raw milk? Milk just from, that has just come out from the from cows. You
I
have.
have. Don't do
So
it
what happens to
regularly.
that milk if I let it still?
Oh no, I didn't stay long enough
Well,
for
I'm
to
going to
know
tell you,
that part of the process.
the clumps of fat of that milk that just came out will press. You will have two. You will have layers. And the process that our milk, we don't have to agitate it. The milk that you buy, the whole milk that you buy on the stores, is because they break those clumps in a way so tiny that then you don't have the sedimentation that you will have with raw milk. So let's take this example to our situation. So when we try to get people that are different and try to convert them to us, we break whatever makes them different to make them look like us. So my hair and my black hair products are for me to have straight hair. You know why? Because having curly hair, it's not, that's bad hair. uh, in Puerto Rico, there was this huge singer. I mean, he was like our, I can clearly compare like Elvis or something like that. I mean, in the sense of Latin music, called Cheo Feliciano, and he had a hair a song that says that he was, he noticed that the rain was coming, and he was worried that he might get wet and that will ruin his hair. But then he started to think, well, my hair is bad already, so why should I worry about the hair hitting my, the water hitting my hair? And it was a really a terrific song. You really need to hear it. But the thing is, that type of, he just put into words the type of thing that tend to happen. Like, if my hair is not the right type of hair, if I don't have the right type of color, I shouldn't be brunette. Maybe I should be blonde. That sort of thing. So
Yeah, I want to interject right here. So I was actually just in a group yesterday with an Advent group with some women, Black women to be specific, and we were talking about how we have this stereotype that we have to be strong, or we can't take a break, or if we take a break, we feel bad about taking a break, and it is because of what society told us that we had to be, or what we have to be, and we have to be as strong as the white male. and if we show any weakness, we are less than. Even though we start from the bottom anyway, trying to go move up, even though we at the bottom holding everybody else up. And so, on to your point, about a culture losing its uniqueness, its power, its glory, trying to simulate into somebody else's culture. A whole generation of generations are suffering now because we are now dyeing our hair to fit like the majority group, or that we are putting chemicals in our hair that is making us bald and having cancer, or we changing our names and trying to make them sound more white so we can get the top job. We are assimilating to be like somebody that we are not made to be. And it's important to be authentic, but it's hard to be authentic in America, because in America it tells us that we have to be like the white woman if you're a female, and you have to be like the white male if you're a male, regardless of where you come from in the world and your upbringing and all of that. And so assimilation is awful. In my opinion, I believe assimilation is just awful.
And just want to add a thing, and I would like to just kind of come in. And I'm going to give you an example of mine. This is an example that I live. So Puerto Rico is part of the, or it's a territory of the U.S. Well, there has been always a challenge of, should we become state, or should we be independent, or should be like in the middle? Well, the big great reason of fighting off a statehood has always been, what about our language? What about our culture? What about the things that make us who we are, our history? And that has really caused a lot of angst in the place that I come from. If how many times, and I have heard this, so I may be in a place that I am talking to my wife, and we talk Spanish all the time, and somebody might be bothered, hey, this is America. This is America. We talk here English. So this is, that's what I mean. So assimilation, and I think when we talk about anti-racist, is how what is different has to be subjugated. How what is not the same of the ideal needs to be taken out. We cannot let that in. So I'm going to have our staff take care of it.
For sure.
Go ahead.
Um, cool.
Now go ahead, Tabby.
Um, so one of the things that you said was talking about hair and how power has formed different ideologies within the community. One thing that have noticed about my surroundings as a black man in America, as a black man within my context. If you didn't know, I'm from Owensboro, Kentucky. That's about like, and when people think of Kentucky, they don't think of someone that looks like me. Um, so going into my specific context, especially with my family and my friends and people that I'm surrounded by, it's about 85% Caucasian. Um, to go back to talking about hair, it's not politically correct to have locks. It's not politically correct to have your hair locked and go into a business meeting or wear your hair down. It's not. My little brother actually had told me. He said when I was planning to get my hair locked, he said, "Tavis, don't you think that would look aggressive?" And I asked him, I said, "What do you mean by aggressive? Like, is my hair gonna get up and strangle you? Is it gonna choke you? Is it gonna punch you in the face? Like, what do you mean my hairstyle is aggressive?" And I realized that that ideology that he had maintained had stemmed from the social stigma that was present within media. The only times you see professionals with Afrocentric inspired hair is when you see football players on the screen, or pop artists on the screen, and these are people who get the most media time. You don't see, nor do you hear about historical figures like Angela Davis, who wore her afro proudly. So even the way that the media has marginalized the way we view our culture's aesthetic is put into a box and judged and under the assumption of certain ideologies. So I would definitely agree.
I think one of the things that jumps out, and I think that that's a great point that you like bring, like the stigmas that come with just the way we present certain things. And so like chapter 2 is dealing with like this dual consciousness, right? And so it breaks it down like with giving us a couple definitions. The first is assimilation, which we're kind of talking about. Like, so do I just have my hair to fit the normative mainstream? Because where I do want to where I do want to express myself and be totally who I be, if you will, then there is this other aspect of it's tiresome too. Do I feel like fighting this battle today? Is it worth me not putting on a tie today? Is it worth me not speaking like this today? So like there's also like with assimilation, it's we have to ask ourselves the question, why is someone trying to assimilate in the first place? There's usually like this thing called like it's safe passage through society. And I start thinking about this actually by birding. Like, so when you look at birds, and we tied it into race, we looked at birds, and when they travel, they do a couple things. They're looking for safe passage, they're looking for food, they're looking for a safe place to raise their young. And then we looked at the green book that many African Americans had to use when they wanted to travel for safe passage, for food, or for safety, and for a place for their children as they were traveling. And assimilation is a lot like that, in like this kind of abstract concept, in that I'm trying to see how I can navigate through society. So there is this safety that comes with assimilation. So you give up a part of who you are to be safe. But then when you kind of come into this knowledge of who we are, then we can kind of go into this segregationist mode, right? Like, and the book kind of talks about that. Like, so you have assimilation and then segregation. And then once you kind of start figuring out the lies that you were told in your textbooks, how you have authors, you have thinkers who are like you have preachers, you have teachers who are like you, who have similar experiences as you get offended. And to protect everything that you assimilated it into, you begin to go ahead and do your own thing. And so what does the work of an anti-racist have to do with all of this, right? As a believer in Christ, why am I talking about race when it doesn't? And we have to begin to ask ourselves these deep questions and see the other ways that they have played themselves out. And so the book, it breaks down anti-racist when it deals with assimilation and segregation like this. Anti-racist is one who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equal and needs developing, and is supporting policies that reduce racial inequity. The Mexican American civil rights leader Cesar Chavez said it this way: preservation of one's own culture does not require disrespect or contempt of another culture. And that's what we're doing. A lot of times, in order for me to feel good, for me to feel empowered, it means I must disempower or disenfranchise someone else. And if we're doing that, can we honestly take up the mantle of anti-racist? As a believer in Christ, if I'm not talking about race, then I'm not actually wanting to understand the history of racism. So when we look at Brother Tavis' experience with his hair, and like the endeavors he has in life, when we look at the statistics that Richard brings out to us, it shows us something. If I want to say I already have my own belief system set in place, and you come over and you make me believe like you, and because I've joined your belief, you think that it's okay. But why did I join? It might have been for safe passage. And so when we look at missionaries, like in the church history, we can't be afraid of our history, even the grim parts of it. Martin Luther King said the church is not a perfect place, but I would hate to see this broken world without it. We have to look at the imperfections of our church. There were places where if you didn't believe like me, we would send in people to murder. And then we would go back and ask, so are you ready to believe like us now? Like that was a part of how like conquering took place for a while. And so think about why does race matter? Did it matter then when people were being forced to give up what they believed for another belief? Because that still is a part of the history. When we look at how stories are enacted, it's not just we can't just look at the sunshine and then dismiss all of what this brings to the table, because as Christians we have this idea of Jesus fix it, and we don't have this idea, and we can lean more into the idea of caring for it. How do I care for you in the midst of my brokenness, or in the midst of this race, so that we can begin to find viable solutions that respect the humanity within all of us? But Laura, do you have something that you want to chime in with?
Preach, sir. I think just to add maybe a little bit of another layer onto that, when we're talking about the segregationist piece and we're talking about assimilation and we're talking about history, we also have like this dual history of racism. Segregation really, and we're here I'm in the Southeast and based in Atlanta. You know, here in the South, segregation was the way of being, and it was protectionist. It was white folks separating themselves, removing themselves, and elevating themselves in terms of wanting to, quote unquote, protect. And so you have segregationism as the pendulum swinging. But it's the one racist history that's covert. And then assimilation is that next phase of racism that's more overt, that's internalized, and it's very much part of the Americanism, American ideology, American exceptionalism. And I really think it's important to highlight that it's sort of the foundation of our current political identity. The way that we relate to the world is the way that we relate to communities that live on the margin. And you can see so many parallels between the ways that we do not care for our brother, to the way that we organize ourselves, the way that we think about ourselves. And the very last couple of sentences in chapter 2 says to be an anti-racist is to conquer the assimilationist consciousness and the segregationist consciousness. So you have to do both. And that's a tall order right there. But you have to do both. You have to be willing to sit in the middle of that and be uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable with discomfort. And then it says the white body no longer presents itself as the American body. The black body no longer strives to be the American body, knowing there is no such thing as the American body, only American bodies radicalized by power. And that takes us sort of into that next place where we then have created these systems of identity based on race, which then we've redistributed power and resources along those same lines. And that's where we get to the systemic piece. And I think it's really important, particularly if there are folks that are in the pews of the Methodist Church, or other folks that are listening, to look at the ways that racism shows up in less obvious means. And the ways that it shows up, you mentioned like our history, even our church's history, or on Sunday morning at noon, high noon on Sunday is the most segregated time of the American life, according to Martin Luther King. And he was right. Be thinking through a lot of this, and that's sort of part of being anti-racist, not sort of, it is. You have to be willing to think through a lot of this and come to terms with that dueling consciousness, which I have to say is a lot easier for an ally, because we haven't been fed. We are the standard. It's easier for us. And that's important for us to recognize, and why we should be part of these conversations, part of the solutions, to then listen to you all, share and explain and break it down, because then we can break down these systems and these structures and these ideologies, which are just constructs. We can break them down together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I want so. Oh man, I think I'm about to get myself in trouble, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it. The United Methodist Church has its own embedded assimilation that I don't know if we know or we do know and we expect. They want you to become the white pastor, and to think, talk, preach, teach, and our people don't need that. Our people need us to reach them where they are. Our people, meaning if I was an Asian woman, I need to speak the Asian woman's language. I don't need to act like a white male. And I feel as though the United Methodist Church expect all of us to be this white male and to function that way. And if we don't, you get punished. And the punishment is we won't ordain you. We won't give you your license, or we would say that, oh, go back to school, or we don't have a church for you. And they're closing churches every day. Every annual conference, there's a church being closed because they didn't have a pastor, or they didn't have a pastor that can bring in people. So I feel as though that within the body, within the system of the United Methodist Church, there's assimilation that they want to happen, but they're also saying that we want to make disciples, and that's our stand on scripture. But how do you make disciples at the same time of not being honest and true to who you are and to whom you are and to what God is calling you to be, but you're making disciples? And I feel like it's working in a factory and you sending out bad goods. And if you do that for long enough, you're going to have a generation of people who just are bad Christians in a sense. And that might be an oxymoron for some people, where you don't believe that Christians can be bad in that sense. But you can raise a child that has bad morals. You can raise a child that will go into the community and just do bad. And I feel like if we can't be authentic, I feel like if we can't be our true selves, we're going into community and doing more harm than good. And John Wesley told us to do no harm, right? But I believe there's absolutely a lot of harm being done when you are asking me not to be who I am. Asking everybody, Asian people, our Indian brothers and sisters, asking people not to be who they are, to be like somebody else, and that somebody else is white privilege.
I think that it's wonderful that you bring this to the conversation, and then I also commend you for having the courage to actually just kind of like just put that out there. Playing for everybody to kind of like digest, process, and work with you through, and because we're all doing this work together, right? I think one of the things that kind of goes along with that is there's another book called Canoeing the Mountain, and it's about basically transition, and the centering imagery for it is like Lewis and Clark exploration, then with Sacagawea, and how they were trying to secure this waterway, but then they get so far and now they're faced with the Rocky Mountains, and they weren't prepared for that, and how they had to get rid of their canoes and their whole like struggle. And I think when we start talking about race, that's another thing that happens. When we look at the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church in particular, this is a fairly young denomination. It starts in 1968. And when you look at where Methodism, is, Methodism for a minute was like one of the central religions or denominations for this country. Like they had the most people for a time. We are no longer living in that same reality. For a long time, Christianity was the belief system that most people lived in. And even though that's a foundation that we kind of have, that is still kind of shifting a whole lot. And so now we find ourselves trying to canoe the mountains as well. Like, so how do we deal with this transition? If where I sit on Sunday, or where I send my children to school, are predominantly like me, what do I do when my church is still like this, but the community around it has totally shifted? And one of the things that we tend to do is we go back to our training, or we go back to our familiar settings if we weren't trained. So that's why it's important to have curriculums that are diverse so that we can put them into practice. If they're just reflecting one culture, then I can pass the test, but I won't always be putting it into practice. And now I'm behind because now I have to create something new. And then I think about, because of the church being predominantly white, 90% plus, then
90%.
we are creating pastors, right? Yes, you probably gonna be at a black church, but if you're phenomenal or things like this, we might need you to go sustain one of these churches. So you want to make sure that your pastors can have like this breadth of experience, or connection, able to be able to connect. But it's difficult when you expect people to connect, but you don't allow them to be. So how can I authentically connect when I'm only trying to be holy because it's my profession and I'm trying to pass? When I'm only doing soul care because it's an agenda on the line item for the conference, and not because I'm really asking the question, is it well with my soul? And when we're talking about this racist work, is it really well with your soul? Because when you're doing soul work and when you're doing love and reconciliation, it sounds nice and fluffy on the flyers, but it gets gritty.
Yep.
And it hurts when you have to start looking at those things that make you cringe and say, but how? And I still love this person even though I was raised this way. And what about this? And since we're in the Advent season, this is a perfect time for like that joyful anticipation, but that's also like a great shift. Like if we really look at that in context, right? There's already a system in place. They knew the scriptures, because that's how the wise men knew to follow the stars. The Magi knew how to follow the star. But Jerusalem and Herod, they were all shocked when the news came, because they knew the same scripture. They had the scripture. They had the tradition. The wise men were shifting things, and then they had to discern, do I go back to Herod, or do I honor what the Spirit is telling me? And there is always this advent that is happening in the church for us to see Christ in new ways, for us to experience Christ in new ways in our community, for me to do missions regardless of even if you go to my church or not. But a lot of times we want to create disciples, which isn't a bad thing. But why do we want to create disciples? And if the answer is just so that we can have more numbers and so that we can continue to meet this budget, is that the reason that we should be creating disciples for Jesus Christ? And we have to wrestle with that.
I am going to um, tell you a little bit about uh, the just a little bit of a part of the Good Samaritan story. Amy Jill Levine from Vanderbilt University. She's a Jewish scholar, but she's also a scholar in New Testament. So this is a Jewish scholar that is a scholar in New Testament. And she describes how Jews would have heard from Jesus the story of the Good Samaritan, or the, we call it the Good Samaritan, but it's, the story of the Samaritan. So what she says is that when they are describing, when Jesus starts describing the priest and the Levite, she says that most people would not have felt that they were represented when they talk about the priest or they talk about the Levite. So when the hero of the story is the Samaritan, which the Samaritans hated the Jews, and the Jews hated the Samaritans. This is there was hate, from back and forth, in the way that they saw each other. The incredible thing is that the story that Jesus states is that when the Samaritan is helping this person, the only person that the audience could only be identified with is the beaten person. So now you got a problem. The person that I hate is the person that has compassion for me, and is the one that is saving my life. And it was so in that way that at the end of the story, the scribe couldn't even say that it was a Samaritan. It was the one who had compassion. So the other thing that I want to tell you about the word compassion is that the word in the Greek language for compassion, what really the etymology of that word is when somebody has your intestines and squeeze them. So this person, the Samaritan, is looking at this body naked. There are no signs. So if he's backwards, could be a Samaritan, or it's a Samaritan, or it could be a Jew or Samaritan. He doesn't know. He just knows that this person needs help, and his guts are, just twisted, and he goes there. So when we talk about racism, how can we see the other with the same love and compassion without thinking who you are? I just see you in need, or I see the good things that you do, or I think, I can see you. And by seeing the other, then, we become, we see them, not just, it's not to be judged by the color of the skin, is to be judged because we are all part of this human part. In, I think it was 2002, 2003, or something like that. I don't remember what year it was. A professor in Wheaton University, African American professor at Wheaton, very conservative. She was appalled by the way that Muslims, especially women, were portrayed. So in solidarity, she wore for a day a hijab. This is a Christian professor. Well, I don't have to tell you that she was kicked out of the university. So am I willing to wear a hijab? Am I, willing to be in the foot of the other, in the shoes of the other? Am I willing to say, if it's unjust, it's unjust. I don't care who you are, where you come from, who do you believe with, it's just unjust. You were saying, and I think you said it so well. What is the purpose of evangelism? And 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 I my question is, what other purpose could evangelism have if it's not the purpose of spreading the love of God? I mean, isn't that what it's all about? What is the good news if it's not that we are loved, that we have a caring God? So, anything else is just, frosting, that's just dessert. But, so that's a reflection of what, some of the things that you all have said.
All right, so we jumping in the chat box right fast. We see that it's popping. We see that we got somebody say that they love it. We see I agree with what you said. We see St. Luke's United Methodist Church, very interesting, and I agree with her too. I'm not sure if it's systematic or isolated. And looking at the topic and then going back into the book on chapter 2, dealing with this dual consciousness. Like, is it isolated or is this systematic? And chapter 2 kind of touches on that briefly, and it kind of deals with in order to, in the author's words, in order to do the work of being an anti-racist, we have to not. What does it say? Let me look now. We find faults within the black community. Can they be attributed to black behavior and not racist policy? And so those are some of the things that we have to look at too. Like, so us being Methodist, we use the quadrilateral, and one of those things on that is reason. So we are very good for asking these difficult questions: the who, what, why, and where. So we know if we should really be moving on this thing or how to move on this. And I'm not saying that we should pick one or the other, but I'm saying that there's a need for us to kind of find that balance. So when we look at the behaviors of somebody, are they're lashing out because they're disrespectful, they're irresponsible, they're reckless, they just need more God in their life. Like, we will point at the behaviors, but are we also looking at the policies which might help these behaviors persist? So Dr. Martin Luther King, when the riots are happening, one of his writings said that yes, looting is wrong, it is bad, but we cannot just demonize the looting without also demonizing the institutions and policies which causes the looting to occur. And that's what we have to do. Like, so yes, like when we look at certain issues, we talk about broken homes and things like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm a component that we need homes to be holistic and healthy and provide spaces for mental health. But we also have to look at the things in the community and why they aren't there helping those communities. What policies put families against each other? Or took people out of the home. Like, so when we look at the 3 strikes rules, where African Americans and other minorities were being charged for crimes at astronomical rates, and then as opposed to their white counterparts. When we look at the health, like the eating habits, and we look at how in some places there are literally food deserts, so you can't find fresh fruits and vegetables in a 5-mile radius. And we start looking at these things, and then we start taking into consideration. So how will this affect somebody when they come to church and I ask them to tithe consistently? How does this affect somebody when they're in the classroom? How does this affect our students, who we say that we want to make more pastors, but can we make sure that Brother Tavis got a scholarship? Like, so are we looking at these things now? Are we looking at the behavior? Yes, but are we as intentional and strategic with also critiquing the policies that are helping these injustices persist?
So I'm on mute. All right. So for me, with that's a question that you get asked a lot. Is it systematic or is it isolated? People ask that question even when it comes to police brutality. They was like, well, it's only that county, or it's only that system, or it's only that city. But it's not true. It is a systematic issue, in my opinion. It is not, and it's not just that particular area. It is happening over and over, and the difference is it's been recorded. People are bold enough to talk about it. If they're going to get lashes and get beat up and thrown out, might as well go down fighting, instead of being like our ancestors, being quiet and trying to assimilate. So instead of a generation of in assimilating and being quiet and holding your head down and yes sir, no sir, situation, we are using our voice. And I believe is not a isolated issue. I don't, within the United Methodist Church, within the police, within our society, I don't think it's isolated. I think it is a systematic issue. If we look at the United Methodist Church and where they have started new church plant, where they put their money, where they put their time, it is not in the African American communities. It is not in the Latinos communities. It's just not. And where they will pour in monies into white new church starts and or white pastors to start new churches, right? They pour money into that, where in other cases it's not like that. So for me, or even when we look at the police, or we look at local police and the local laws, that you know that in this particular area you already got a red box around it, that you already know that it's high crime, drugs, dropout, you know, all of that. But instead of putting those kids in jail and putting more police out there, you should have after school programs. You should have mental health services. You should have all kinds of different social programs to help those people in that area. But you lock them up. You take away their rights. You tell them that they're not worthy or they're not good enough. Where you should be helping them like you would do anybody else. If a white boy go and shoot up a whole school, you don't put him in jail. You give him the mental health problem, mental health help that he needs so he can be better. Why don't we get that same benefit, right? Or why don't our minority groups get that same benefit? And that's why I think trying to be like somebody else is just hurting us, because the reason why I believe why we don't get that help is because we aren't like them. If we was like them, then we get the help. But because we're not like them and we're not doing everything we're supposed to be doing to be like them, and we appear to be lazy, and because we are lazy, we should just be thrown away and put in jail. That's why I believe that is I believe that's why we don't get the help, or our communities don't get the help that they deserve.
Uh,
I think
uh,
it's
uh, Saint, go ahead.
Well, it's
I think
just
it's
just
really
want to mention
difficult
that.
for.
Go ahead, please,
JS,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I think it's really difficult for any big issue to be isolated in today's culture, especially coming from my perspective as a millennial, um, and dealing with the influx of influences. You have social media, you have TV, you have all these other things, and when these things become public, what I have learned through watching the social trends throughout COVID-19 is an ideology that we may see as isolated when it comes to the forefront, through one of these killings or through one of these racial injustice um, occasions. Someone is going to have a similar ideology that's going to come to the surface, and they voice that opinion vehemently. And then there's more people who gather. This is why we have pages of support, Christian pages of support for the white man who killed Ahmaud Arbery, um, because that ideology that may have been isolated to a specific area of Georgia disseminated through the medium of social media, and not. I don't think that it gathered. I don't think they got hooked to the ideology. I think because they seen that their ideology was at the pinnacle of a social topic, they felt comfortable with the anonymity of the internet and the anonymity of social media and the anonymity that we have by connecting through these virtual platforms and spaces to vent their opinion. And so, yes, I don't. I really isolation is something that we are dealing with physically, um, and mentally. I would argue, but paradoxically, paradoxically, in a time that we should be more connected with all the social media that is supposed to connect us. But we, through these social media platforms, we are promoting these ideologies of division, um, and they are forming these silos. I was watching a documentary on, it was called The Social Dilemma, and he was talking about how the trends of social media and how fake news is being pushed and the truth is being distorted and groupthink is being promoted. If it does not get regulated, then a person who is in charge of the ethical portion of promoting social media says this could lead to civil war. He took this to Congress, and he was like, "I'm actually," he says, I'm not scared of you being someone that is extreme. I'm scared that what you're saying could be true, because these ideologies are being pushed, not in an isolated way, um, and it is scary to go out and as Reverend Carr said, to go out and struggle to be who I am as a black man in America, because I got a best example that I have because I'm trying to get everything out before I have to go because I got Bible study. But I got a message from my younger sister, and it scared me to my core. She said, "Tavis, the KKK is doing initiations, and they're kidnapping, torturing um, black men." And this was a message that was perpetuated on Snapchat. This is also a message that was perpetuated to her great grandmother. This was a message that she had sent to me. And so not only have these things been disseminated and dispersed, but it has enculturated people into an aspect of fear. And I think that people, when they get in, fear drives people to do a lot of things, especially when that fear is stemming from a place. I remember I was going to an annual conference, and a man had said, and I'm a psychology major, my undergraduate degree, some of the most painful words mentally and neuropsychologically for a human being to utter are the words, "I don't know." And when you are dealing with another race, another culture, another the other people, you don't know a lot. And your mentality, your brain is wired to conform, to assimilate to something. Okay, if I cannot explain it, how can I then go forth constructing this in my mind to where it makes sense? And a lot of people have constructed that this race, these people, these certain other are inferior. And so we have to confront our mentality, as we go into the community and be like, okay, because they are other. And the thing about this is that, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, the thing about this that I don't understand is, especially being a student at a seminary, is that when you go to get your master's of divinity, when you get your master of divinity and you're close to getting your master's of divinity, you understand that you can never master divinity. You can never do it, because God is an infinitesimal being who you will never understand. But we pursue God despite of us not understanding God. So how is it that we can do that with God, but we cannot do that with people? Now scripture says, how can you love me whom you have never seen, but hate your brother who you see every day? You are a lie and the truth is not in you. So that's all I have to say.
So this is a perfect segue. I think that we do need to finish for today, but this is a perfect segue. I am remembering hearing you just said what you said. Uh, um, Gregory of Nyssa on the 4th century had this great book called Life of Moses. And one of the things is that, Moses at one time asked him, "Can I see your face?" And, God said, "Well, no, because, you're going to die." But then, like God went through him and he saw the back of God. So Gregory of Nyssa said, what this means is that we, as believers, as Christians, are always trying to chase God and trying to get near Him, always seeing His back and trying to get closer and closer to His back. And the way that we can do that is not seeing God only as that in heaven, but how can we get closer and closer to the other? How can we get closer and closer to our neighbors? How can we get closer and closer to see them? And nobody can understand anybody fully. So, in that sense, I'm always looking at your back, if I may use that same analogy. But the closer that I get, the better I can understand. And I think that this is just part of what we need to ask ourselves. So thank you very much. I agree that poor churches serving community at a community level do not have the pastors, that are respected by the institutions. We definitely need more pastors in poor churches, and we need to elevate poverty to another level. Uh, Thank you very much, all. It was really my pleasure. Hopefully, Nick will be here the next time, doing a lot better job, at least in from my seat. And I mean, the panel has been just outstanding. So thank you all. You've really been great. And God bless you. See you in about a week.